First, I didn't even realize I'd been arrested. It only hit me about 2 hours later when they were testing our blood.
There were 2 soldiers on the boat with us. We grabbed their guns, took them down and threw them overboard. Then we took the guns and escaped.
These 2 men found themselves forcibly recruited and among hundreds of others in the same situation. They also claim the military is drafting people who are physically or mentally unfit to fight. Hello and welcome to Doh Athan, a weekly podcast about human rights stories from Myanmar. It's brought to you by Fondation Hirondelle. This episode is produced by a Doh Athan freelance journalist. Names and voices may have been changed to protect contributors.
When I showed them my NRC, they told me to park my motorbike on the side of the road and wait. Then they started checking our phones. They didn't find anything, but still they didn't let us go. Instead, they sent us to Ko Aung Kyaw Battalion 57.
In August, 28-year-old Ko Aung Kyaw was riding a motorbike with his brother-in-law through Phyo region when soldiers stopped them at a checkpoint near Shuijin city gate. The 2 men were doing nothing wrong, but were taken to a military base. Originally from Ayeyarwady region, Ko Aung Kyaw had moved with his family to Yangon 7 years ago. But when the conscription law was enacted early this year, he and his wife and 3 children fled to Phyo region. When he was detained, he didn't dare ask the soldiers why, and they didn't tell him what was happening.
At first, I didn't even realize I'd been arrested. It only hit me about 2 hours later when they were testing our blood. That's when I overheard them talking about soldier recruitment, and that's when I knew.
The military enacted the conscription law in February 2024 after suffering heavy losses in both land and manpower to the Three Brotherhood Alliance. The law mandates military service for men aged 18 to 35 and women aged 18 to 27. Many would argue that a military regime which seized power from an elected government has no legal right to draft citizens. And there's no provision for conscientious objection, which is a human right under Article 18, freedom of conscience. But in the beginning there was some semblance of process with a lottery system at the local level. However, since young people started fleeing in droves to avoid conscription, there have been numerous reports of forced recruitment. Attorney Uji Mint says the junta's actions are unjustifiable.
In other countries, conscription is about defending against external threats, protecting your nation. But here it's about killing your own people, not for national defense, but to protect the military leader. It's like oil and water. There's no comparison. The military, which is supposed to protect its citizens, is using them to protect itself. It's disgusting.
3 days after his arrest, Ko Aung Kyaw and 14 others were transferred from Battalion 57 to Battalion 440 in Daik U Township, Phyo region. There were about 250 new conscripts there. Ko Aung Kyaw says nearly all of the guys he spoke to had been forcibly recruited, and some of them were not even fit to fight.
There were people there with chronic illnesses, disabilities, or who were just completely unfit for this. They did these so-called medical checkups, but even if you failed, they wouldn't let you go.
The military's own conscription law exempts people with permanent disabilities and anyone deemed unfit in a medical examination. Ko Aung Kyaw said he saw one guy with a broken leg and pelvis get released, but only after his family paid soldiers 60 lakhs. That's about $1,300. Others were shaken down for bribes as well.
They'd size people up like how much can they afford, or what kind of background do they come from. If you had money, they'd demand 70 lakhs, if not 40 or 50. I saw them outright asking for money from people they were about to release.
Ko Phyo had a similar experience. He'd been an undocumented migrant worker in Thailand since before the coup. But he was arrested by Thai authorities and deported back to Myanmar in July. Myanmar immigration officers should have let him and the other 99 deportees go home. But instead they sent them to the sports hall in Doh Athan. Ko Phyo says the soldiers recruited everyone in the right age group. There was no real screening process.
They even went as far as arresting people who were mentally ill. They didn't spare the ones with broken legs and arms either. They forced them into conscription. Some of these people aren't just mentally ill, they're completely out of it. Honestly, I don't even know what to say. It's like the military is just as crazy.
Ko Phyo was in a group of 36 sent to a recruitment camp in Myaik Township. They were threatened with torture and warned about landmines if they tried to run away.
They threatened us, said if we tried to run they'd beat us, torture us. They didn't go into detail but made it clear it would hurt a lot. I've heard from others that defectors couldn't even walk after torture. It's that brutal.
The group was held in the camp until there were 277 recruits. Soldiers then transported them to a military training school in Phyo Township, first via Navy ship and then in smaller groups in fishermen's boats. It was at this last stage that Ko Phyo seized the moment to escape.
At one point, they used small boats to move us in batches, about 30 people per boat. By then, I'd got to know the others. I asked if anyone wanted to stay in the military. Nobody did. Everyone wanted to escape. So we decided to act together. There were 2 soldiers on the boat with us. We grabbed their guns, took them down and threw them overboard. Then we took the guns and escaped.
With help from the boatmen, the group reached a nearby village, and from there various resistance forces helped the conscripts to safety. Ko Aung Kyaw also managed to escape. Once they got to the Daegu base, the new recruits were allowed access to their phones at certain times of day. At one point, he managed to contact resistance forces. And 10 days after his arrest, he and another youth climbed out of a window and ran through the fields towards a resistance-held area. So began a 4-day walk during which Ko Aung Kyaw barely slept, and he had to rely on the kindness of villagers to survive and stay in touch with his resistance contact.
I didn't have my phone, which made escaping even harder. I needed to stay in contact, but I had to rely on borrowing other people's phones in every village I reached. Some people were kind and willing to help, but others weren't. And I couldn't risk asking just anyone. If I asked the wrong person, I might have been caught, and that would have been the end of me. It was so much trouble.
General Zo Min Tun recently stated that the military's target is 5,000 new recruits per month. By November, an estimated 35,000 individuals had undergone basic training. Many more young people face forced recruitment in the coming months. The National Unity Government, or NUG, is limited in what it can do for these people, but Prime Minister's Office spokesperson Unepon Lat suggests that they join resistance forces instead.
We'd like to encourage those who are forcibly recruited to work with the revolutionary forces instead, Join the people's embrace if you can. Resist, instead of obeying the terrorist military's orders to turn your guns towards the public. If it's not possible to do that yet, there are many ways to resist from within by disobeying orders or sabotage. Be a watermelon in the army.
Of Ko Phyo's boatload of 30 escapees, 20 joined the Karen National Defense Organization, including Ko Phyo himself. Meanwhile, Ko Aung Kyaw has brought most of his family to the liberated area where he sought refuge. He hopes they can find work there to make a living, and he's urging other young people to stay as far away from the junta as possible.
It's best to stay away from them. Once you're in their hands, you have no choice. They tell you to die, you die. They tell you to live, you live. Stay as far away as you can. That's all I can say, nothing else.
Thanks for listening to this edition of Doh Athan. We'd welcome your feedback on social media, and please follow or subscribe to our pages. This project on human rights reporting is supported by Fundación Hirondelle with the help of our donors. You can listen to our podcasts via the Doh Athan Facebook page. They can also be found on SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes, Spotify and Telegram. You can also listen every Saturday night from 9 to 10 p.m. and Sunday morning from 6 to 7 a.m. on Voice of America Radio. Please tune in again next week.